Welcome to Second Take, the show that focuses on the issues behind the news. Mineral Resources Minister Susan Shabangu says that asking whether South Africa should nationalise its mining industry is the wrong, dangerous question to ask in searching for the answer to South Africa's evil triplets of poverty, inequality and unemployment. Mining Weekly editor Martin Creamer is in the studio to tell us more. Welcome, Martin.
Thanks, Shannon.
Now, Susan Shabangu has said that we're asking the wrong question. What, in her view, is the right one?
Yeah, I think she hit the nail on the head. You know, the solution of nationalisation being proposed is worse than the problem, and the problem is poverty, inequality and unemployment, and that is what must be tackled. And this whole issue of how you deal with your resources is a question being asked all around the world. It's not just South Africa, but fortunately other countries aren't proposing nationalisation. Unfortunately, we're proposing nationalisation as a solution. So will nationalisation solve South Africa's problem of poverty, inequality and unemployment? It's a dangerous question to ask because you're starting off on the wrong foot. You know, you should be saying our problem is poverty, inequality and unemployment. How can we best go about solving that? And the world has proved that nationalisation is the worst way. So the solution being proposed by the ANC Youth League is the worst possible route you can take.
Susan Shabangu has mentioned that private sector miners aren't doing enough to benefit near mine communities. What does she mean by not doing enough? What more can they do?
Yeah, she spoke about scholarships and bursaries and education, which is well and good. But a lot of the companies are doing scholarships and bursaries and education, and I think a far more thoughtful approach needs to be adopted than the minister, let on. I mean, Anglo Gold Ashanti has set up a special unit to try and set up a new eco-social model because it has to be done well. You know, how you're going to deal with communities is something that is being asked all around the world, and we need to come up with very good solutions in South Africa because of the poverty, inequality and unemployment situation. So I think the private sector is probably going to go about it very well and enough. What is enough? I mean, there's already taxes, there are already royalties, and there is a lot of housing. I mean, you can see a lot of the housing. There are clinics that are built, all sorts of sports facilities. So people are doing things, but I think that they need to arrive at a far more scientific solution, and it needs to possibly be written into the legislation.
And these things obviously come at a price.
For sure, but with the profits that are pouring out of these mining companies now, it would be negligible. That social investment would be well spent. And you can see some of the people who've tried it out in the Congo. Even there was an experiment by an Australian company there mining copper, and they found that the expenditure was negligible. The benefits were huge, and they could change economies in the region by just building roads and getting people to market faster, and it didn't cost them much. And said, well, they haven't even tarred them yet, but instead of people taking days to get to market, they're taking half a day.
Well, that's very impressive. Now, Shabangu has condemned the wide wage gap between mine management and workers. Yet the same can be said between, say, a state-employed nurse or teacher and cabinet ministers. What's her stance on that?
Yeah, I think she won't draw any attention to that gap again too easily, because, of course, debating in this forum that was presented by the New Age, that's a daily newspaper, and conducted by Bruce Whitfield, a radio personality, he immediately threw the question back at her. And he said to her, don't you think nurses and teachers could say that the gap between our salary and your salary as a cabinet minister is disproportionate and huge? And of course the minister does have a sense of humour, so she laughed her head off. But it was just to illustrate the point. Don't point fingers about wages, etc., because they will come back at you. But Bobby Gotzel is of the opinion that there should be a different formula with regard to executive pay, that he wants it to be longer term. The benefits that accrue should be over a longer period, and he wants to de-individualize them. He believes that the collective team should benefit from these very big bonuses that are paid, rather than one single individual. And so that is what he's proposing through Business Leadership South Africa, and I think it is a better solution, because you don't want the leader sort of so far ahead in pay, and he's expected to lead a team. It does give people incentive to get to that point, but it doesn't seem to be acceptable in South Africa when you've got these huge inequalities, and we're now worse on the Gini coefficient than we were, before democracy.
Now, finally, the MPRDA is currently being amended to prevent a second debacle like what happened at Aurora.
Yes.
What's the story there?
Aurora, it's an embarrassment for South Africa. There was a liquidation process, and it was being conducted in a way that it was taking all bidders into account. And early bids came in for Orkney from Simmer and Jack. Those were turned down on the grounds that it was insufficient. Grootvlei out at Springs, where the real angst has taken place and where asset stripping is the order of the day, that had an impediment because there was a hedge over it. So anyone who took over that mine also took over the hedge. That means that although the gold price is high, you've got to sell your gold at a very low price. So it's a hard burden to bear. So against that background, the actual liquidation process was very slow, and it is now ground to a halt because finally the Chinese were supposed to come in and rescue it, but when they realized this is such a controversial hot potato, even the Chinese investors moved away from it. So the minister's saying we can't have this again. We must bring something into the law which maybe has a different form of curatorship, maybe by people who know the mining industry better than liquidators who are really financial people. And so I think that when the new legislation comes in at the end of, early next year, I think that, or the middle of next year, they're going to make sure that they plug this gap that has caused such embarrassment for South Africa and has indicated, that mining is not for sissies. You can't just have investors who don't know anything about the game coming in and taking over assets like the Orkney mine and the Grootvlei mine. You have to have seasoned campaigners, as we saw with the third element of that liquidation, which went off well. There were it was a three-part liquidation, and two parts have gone sour. One part has been very successful because it was sold. That was the Free State asset, the President Steyn mine. That went to a seasoned campaigner. It went to Harmony Gold.
Yes.
And Harmony Gold knew exactly what to do there. They've got mines nearby. And, they are working synergistically to make sure that that mine has got a future. And that's what needs to happen. There was some loss of employment, but they're hoping within time they'll take up that employment slack and maybe even have a greater number if they can expand the way they want to. So I think the long and the short of it is that you do need expertise in these liquidations. And the legislation in terms of what Susan Shabangu wants to do will take care of that in future.
Well, let's hope that they also take that into account in the nationalisation debate. Thank you very much, Martin.
It's a great pleasure, Shannon.
That's the show for today. Join us again next time for more news and insight into what's happening in the mining world.